20 million people, soldiers assigned to Nazi death squads, residents of ordinary bourgeois Berlin neighborhoods, in fact, every second adult living in the Third Reich, had lined up to watch the movie. The on-screen drama they saw went something like this. Lacking the money to buy his wife coronation jewels, the Duke of Württemberg turns to the unscrupulous financier Joseph Susch Oppenheimer. The evil Jew corrupts the Duke. Later he rapes the very innocent and very blonde Dorothea Sturm as the price of her husband's freedom from prison. Following her suicide, Susch is executed by the townspeople, and the Jews are expelled from Württemberg. Finally, an anti-Semitic film, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels happily recorded in his diary for the 18th of August 1940. The return on the regime's 2 million Reichsmarks investment were pretty impressive. After special screenings of Judenschutz in Auschwitz, historian Susan Tegel records, prison guards were inspired to give Jewish prisoners extra beatings. Earlier this week, the Israeli filmmaker Nadav Lapid provoked a furor by describing Vivek Agnihotri's The Kashmir Files as a propaganda vulgar movie inappropriate for an artistic competitive section of such a prestigious film festival. Facing a deluge of social media invective, some of it pretty ugly anti-Semitic abuse, Israeli diplomats have pushed back against Lapid's remarks. But that's not what I want to discuss today. Fiction is not innocent. Like all narratives, the Kashmir Files makes choices about which truths to tell, how to tell them, and censors inconvenient bits of history. Even though its tenor is inflammatory, the film isn't a call for genocide, and while India's movie industry is regulated through a censorship regime more familiar to totalitarianism than liberal democracy, it has a pretty rich tradition of talking back to power too. Lapid's critique, though, raises an issue that is way bigger than one film. And the questions are these. To what extent has popular film in India and other mass media served as an instrument of state power? And how does power impact our imagination itself? The use of films by totalitarian systems is a useful prism to reflect on these very complex questions and the impact they have on our society and our minds. Films in the Third Reich weren't just a production line for hate. 9 out of 10 of the 1100-odd films produced between 1933 and 1945 were non-political. Comedies, detective stories, melodramas, that kind of stuff. Nazi propagandists understood that cinema audiences sought to immerse themselves in familiar fantasy, not demagoguery. The social historian Richard Grunberger has observed that had a cinema goer dozed off in the Depression and woken up in the Third Reich, he would have found the screen filled with the same images. Films in the Third Reich emanated from a ministry of illusion, critic Eric Rentschler has written, not from a ministry of fear. If one is looking for sinister heavies garbed in SS black or crowds of fanatics saluting their Führer, one does best to turn to Hollywood films of the 1940s, not Nazi film production. The elements of Nazi control of films, among them censorship, which was meant to limit American imports, were actually initiated under the liberal democratic Weimar Republic, which preceded the Nazis. The Nazis expanded on these powers, undoing safeguards that mandated no film could be banned just because of its political content. Early in its life, though, the Third Reich grasped that the industrialized production of illusion gave it great power. Through the state-controlled conglomerate Universal Film Action, scholar John Ottman noted way back in 1948, the Nazis worked to shape the zeitgeist, the cultural climate of a restless post-First World War youth cohort. This cohort, which he called aimless, pseudo-romantic, skeptical, and cynical, was among the main audiences for the Nazi message. From 1934 onwards, what was called Filmer became a feature of Germans' own-level education. Karl Ritter's A Passer of Promise, in which a young soldier breaks up with his left-wing girlfriend and chooses the real comradeship of fighting men, was typical of this Nazi youth movie genre. Filmer would lead thousands of teenagers to fight and die for their Führer. Even ostensibly apolitical films critic Scott Spector notes could be redolent with ideology. La Habanera has the very blonde Sarah Leander, and all Nazi stars were very blonde. As Sarah Leander seduced by the tyrannical matador Don Pedro, again played by Yudsu's star Ferdinand Marian, Leander discovers that the seduction of the passionate South is short-lived and longs to return to her Nordic roots. Louis Trenker's The Prodigal Son tells the story of a Bavarian mountain youth's disastrous adventure to New York, after which he discovers the value of his roots. Some of this, I'm sure, sounds pretty familiar to you. The audience, of course, sometimes subverted the message. As Marcia Trotz observes, Yudsos ended up, to some minds, creating a strangely desirable, sexy villain. Ferdinand Marian, that relentless pillager of Aryan womanhood, received baskets of love letters from every city in Germany. For the most part, though, the Nazi film industry succeeded. And it was not alone. Following the Soviet Revolution, filmmakers had enjoyed considerable freedom for over 5 years. Lavish costume dramas like The Decembrists, the political satire of Yakov Protsanov, and new avant-garde directors like Sergei Eisenstein. Some of you will have heard of him, and those of you who haven't must watch his work. These films were widely seen. Foreign films were also available. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks received an ecstatic reception on the streets of Moscow. But then came the rise of Joseph Stalin and a new kind of disciplined Soviet filmmaking. Filmmakers were called on to eradicate the individual and the individual's inner life. The focus was instead to be on the state and its relationship with the people. Film theaters began showing movies like Talka the Bargirl. This is the story of a kulak, a rich farmer, who plots to murder this communist school teacher Sestrin, who's trying to keep the villagers away from vodka. In the end, historian Denise Youngblood writes, Sestrin rescues Tanaka from the clutches of the kulak and turns the tavern into a tea house. The workers lived happily ever after, never taking a drink in their lives. The People's Republic of China also found film a powerful medium to take its message to rural regions, often areas which had no electricity or theatres. The New Story of an Old Soldier, made in 1959, tells of an effort to set up a state farm, which finally succeeds because the hero, and I quote, mobilizes the people and relies on the leadership of the party. The dialogue Singh Deta wrote was crude. Don't thank me, thank the party. But the film itself proved popular, perhaps because it exploded in a context where there was no competition from other kinds of movies. Liberal democracies, since early in the last century, also grappled with the seditious potential of films. The United States Supreme Court in 1917 even ruled that films did not enjoy the right to free speech. Federal Bureau of Investigation's agents harried Charlie Chaplin, convinced he was a communist agitator. From 1942 to 1945, Cajun Copes reveals, the Office of War Information arm-twisted prominent American studios into ideological collaboration, an arrangement that continued to stretch throughout the Cold War. In the long term, the impacts of these arrangements were pretty limited though. Big studios leveraged their economic and political reach to make sure the industry was able to self-regulate. And from the 1950s, filmmakers in the US won a succession of judgments protecting their free speech, even to make films purported to be pornographic or blasphemous. Independent India took a very different course. Too much melodrama, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru chided filmmakers in 1952, takes away from the drama of life. Elites in post-colonial India, Aruna Vasudev has observed, saw films as a reprehensible, though unavoidable social catastrophe. Film has become a powerful influence in people's lives, Nehru grudgingly conceded. But he didn't want a film which was just sensational or melodramatic. Legislation introducing film censorship in 1952, which drew on colonial-era practices, steadily tightened the space for democratic expression, placing pressure on filmmakers to center their work on social pieties, basically things government found acceptable. For much of the 1950s, filmmakers had actually been enthused by Nehru's dreams. Film scholar Priya Joshi has noted, however, that this commitment began to fray after the first decade or so of independence. The schisms lay wide open in Amar Kumar's Ab Dilli Dur Nahi, in which a 10-year-old Chinese travels to the capital to petition the Prime Minister against the wrongful conviction of his father. Nehru had actually promised the filmmaker he would meet the boy in the last scene, but the film eventually shows him only as a kind of spectral presence appearing in rallies and posters. The film bureaucracy responded to Nehru's diminishing capital by clamping down. Dilip Kumar's 1961 film Ganga Jamuna was threatened with a ban for violence and vulgarity, a decision that was only overturned after the Prime Minister's personal intervention. Indira Gandhi used popular films, you remember Kala Patthar perhaps, to legitimize policies like coal nationalization. From then on, the writer Shautik Biswas has observed, an ever-growing number of films have been banned, essentially making it impossible or dangerous to traverse contentious subjects like religion, sexuality, or political conflicts. Films valorizing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's policies or the ideology he represents have exploded in volume. His opponents in states like Tamil Nadu are also using the same tools to build rival political kites. The parties, though, are united in their commitment to crush genuine dissenting filmmaking, which is, of course, filmmaking that targets them. Like the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany eventually collapsed, partly because its culture industry left its people unable to even conceive of the questions they needed to be asking of their rulers. Lapid has dryly noted that nationalism can blind us. You love your country so much, he said in one interview, that you're convinced everyone needs to love it too. The filmmaker went on, I'm Israeli, and I can hate Israel, say terrible things about it and curse it without end. That's one of Israel's strengths. Free societies have the confidence to hear harsh words about themselves, and the integrity to ask themselves if those words might be true. That's something India should cherish and aspire to. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm National Security Editor of The Print. Thank you for listening to Security Code.